Do you still need to take your required minimum distribution this year? If so, it's likely going to be less than last year, and that opens up opportunities. I'll explain coming up. My name's Mike Bernard. I'm the host of the Wise Money Show. I'm also one of the certified financial planners right here at Korhorn Financial Group. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and smash that thumbs up button. A required minimum distribution is required, okay, just like it says, but from your pre-tax retirement accounts as soon as you reach a certain age, your required beginning date, okay? Now they've been changing that all, for the past few years, and it can be pretty confusing. But if you haven't taken if you need to take your required minimum distribution and you haven't taken it yet, it's likely going to be lower this year than last year, and you want to make sure that you don't make a big mistake. In fact, you capture opportunities. So the required minimum distribution, the whole idea around that is when you've been making contributions or funding retirement accounts pre-tax, whether that's your own contribution to a 401k that you then rolled to an IRA, or maybe an IRA contribution, maybe your company match, maybe an ESOP or some sort of profit share or something like that, money that's now in your name, but you've never paid tax on it. The IRS gives that to you, that opportunity. They wrote that into the tax code, but they're not going to let you avoid tax on those dollars forever. At some point, you're going to pay the piper, and it's, well, yeah, whenever I draw the money out, I will have to report it as taxable income. Yeah, I know, but at some point, the IRS says, listen, you got to at least start taking some out. You got to start taking a required, at least minimum amount out of these pre-tax retirement accounts so we can tax it, so it lands on your tax return. And if you're currently in a spot where you're withdrawing more than that to supplement your Social Security, then fine. You've met that required minimum amount because you're drawing more out. But those of you that don't need the money, or maybe are drawing income from other sources, well, this required minimum distribution is a sort of a tax planning issue, something that you've got to do in addition to everything else that you're doing, and therefore calculating that minimum amount and drawing just that minimum amount out is pretty critical and important tax planning strategy. Now, this used to be that required beginning date was at age 70 and a half. The year you turn age 70 and a half, or in that first year, you've got up until April to do it, but then you'd have to still take it for the next year too. And so 70 and a half. Why 70 and a half? No idea. It's a very strange number. Well, based on the Secure Act 1.0 that was passed and took effect in 1/1 of 2020, that age was moved from 70 and a half to 72. Well, big deal. That was just enough to confuse everyone, but not really long enough to make an enormous difference. And therefore, really ever since Secure Act 1.0 was passed, they've been lobbying and trying to pass Secure Act 2.0. They couldn't get it passed until they sort of tucked it into the omnibus spending bill, and it was passed late last year, and therefore, starting 2023, they've moved that age now from 72 to 73, and it's on its way to age 75. So very confusing because of lots of changes, but I appreciate the fact that they're moving that date back. People are living longer, and I like the flexibility. Hopefully you do as well. Your required minimum distribution, if you've reached that required beginning date, it's likely going to be lower this year than last year, and here's why. Your required minimum distribution, how do you calculate what that required minimum amount is? Well, it's based on all the value of all of your pre-tax accounts. Your pre-tax IRAs are all bundled together. 403Bs are separate. 401K is separate as well. So that's often why it makes sense to roll the dollars into an IRA. It makes it easy. Plus, you've got more control over withholdings, and it's easier to manage with beneficiaries, all that sort of stuff as well. But you calculate, well, what's the value of all of those accounts, or what's the value of my IRA on 12/31 of the previous year? And then you divide that by a factor derived from the uniform life expectancy tables that are published by the IRS and whatnot. They just changed recently. They don't change that frequently, okay? So what's the value divided by this divisor? Now that divisor changes every year because your life expectancy, because it's 1 year later, has gone down just a little bit. And so that can mean, well, your required minimum distribution goes up a little bit each year. Not necessarily, because how did how'd the value of your account change? If the value of your account hasn't changed much, but you withdrew dollars last year, then it might mean your required minimum distribution is about the same each year. And I think this is one of the great mistakes is people say, or maybe they're working with a financial advisor that is maybe just phoning it in, not really doing tax planning or helping much. And okay, it's around 14,000 change, so take 15 grand out. All right, 15 grand this year, 15 grand next year, just, take 15 grand out and you're fine. Now do the calculation each year. Last year was an awful year in the stock market. And it was even worse in the bond market. And you might say, no, the bond market was down 13%, stocks were down 19%. I'm pretty sure that means stocks were worth. No, that means the bond market had one of the worst years ever on record. And by the way, the bond market was down in 2021 as well as 2022, and it's currently down at the time of recording this in 2023. So why is that so important? Well, if you're at that required beginning date, meaning you're over age 72, now 73, likely you don't have the majority of your dollars in the stock market. And if you did, yes, those are lower. The value is lower on 12/31 of 22 compared to 12/31 of 21, right? But even if you were low risk and had a lot of dollars in the bond market, your value is likely lower as well. And therefore, when you do that math, of what was the value on 12/31 of 22 divided by that factor, likely you're going to see a 10 to 15% drop in your required minimum distribution. So, word to the wise, make sure you're doing that calculation and you don't just draw the same amount out every single year. Could mean that you could likely be drawing out more than what you need to. Calculate that minimum amount or work with your CFP, have them calculate that for you. They should be doing that for you anyway. But then recognize that because that's now lower, that means the income that lands on your tax return will be lower. And when you couple that with tax brackets expanding a little bit due to inflation, there's now opportunity for you to potentially do some other tax strategies, i.e. a Roth conversion, or doing some other creative strategies where you're recognizing some income, harvesting capital gains or something like that, because you suddenly have a little less income to report or a little bit bigger tax bracket. So if you're married filing jointly in the 12% tax bracket last year, 2022, the 12% tax bracket went up to about $83,000, okay, from about 20 grand up to 83,000. For 2023, that's been expanded. Now the 12% tax bracket goes up to around $89,000, almost $90,000. So you've got more room in the 12% tax bracket. When you add your standard deduction increased as well, and lower RMD, now you've got more room in those lower tax brackets to consider, harvesting capital gains and paying zero federal tax, or doing some Roth conversion or something that above and beyond your required minimum distribution. So work with your certified financial planner, calculate that required minimum distribution so that you know the minimum amount out, and make sure that you take that amount out and don't subject yourself to a penalty or missing that. But then identify what tax opportunities are available to you based on these expanded brackets and lower RMD for this year. So work with your CFP on that. If you don't have a CFP on your team, contact one on my team. Find us online, Korhorn.com. That's Korhorn with K, wisemoneyshow.com. You can find us there as well, or give us an email, info@korhorn.com. All right, there you have it. Go out and take your next wise step in your financial life.